Welcome to the Mindful Mama Movement podcast. I'm Shannon Kinney-Duh, creator of AFreeSpiritLife.com.
And I'm Ashley Walburn, owner of Home Holistic. And together, we are bringing you the Mindful Mama Movement,
the podcast, community, and retreats for women in all stages of motherhood. Mindful mothering is about nurturing your heart and soul while you nurture your children. It's about consciously awakening to your inner wisdom and being peacefully present as a mama, no matter where you are on your journey. From discovering your newborn to loving and accepting the wonderful people who've left your nest.
The Mindful Mama Movement is bringing women together from across the world to celebrate the imperfect journey of motherhood.
Our movement is empowering mamas to be authentic and to live inspired lives. We are so happy you're here. For more info, subscribe to our podcast and join our Mindful Mama Movement community on Facebook. Facebook.com/groups/Mindful Mama Movement.
Let's go there to a place where I hide so you can pour this blindfold from my eyes and I can finally feel alive. Open your heart and your soul, follow. Take time.
Welcome to the Mindful Mama Movement podcast episode number 2. In today's episode, you are going to get to know my co-host a little more, Ashley Walburn, owner of Home Holistic, located in Overland Park, Kansas. I'm so excited to get to know Ashley more as you do, and we're just going to dive right into her story. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, Shannon.
Are you having fun? It's our second show.
I'm having fun. I just think it's way more fun. Shannon and I both really like to visit, so this is really a perfect space for us to be.
Exactly. And we don't get this opportunity very much. I'm like so excited. The kids are locked upstairs. Now, don't worry. They're with a babysitter. They're with the sitter, but it's so nice to have our coffee and just get to chat with each other and chat with all of you.
Yeah.
So, Ash, tell us a little bit more about you. I want to know where you grew up and just a little bit about your childhood.
Well, my childhood is in the Flint Hills of Kansas. And so I was born in Emporia, Kansas. My parents were both from that area, and my grandparents were also all from that area. So they, my family are cattle ranchers, and I grew up riding horses every single day of my life. And I have an older sister, Tara, and a younger brother, Brody. And my mother really kind of ended up being a single mother. Unintentionally. My dad traveled a lot, and so he would be gone for a month and maybe home for 3 days, and then gone for 2 weeks, home for 24 hours. And so she had what I would call, just a burden of parenting without any support at all. And when my dad came home, it was kind of a blast, but also interrupted our normal schedule. So it was also really unfamiliar. So it was a pretty non-traditional household in that none of my other friends had their dad gone all the time. I had friends sometimes spend the night dozens of times before they ever met my dad. And that's really a lot about my childhood. I grew up there, finished high school there. I was a cheerleader in high school, which affected riding my horse, which was a really hard transition for me. That my horses were kind of the first place that I got to go and get away and clear my head and let go of all the stress of childhood, just me and my horse. And so with kind of all my social things in high school, that was affected in a lot of ways. So what else do you want to know about my childhood? I don't know.
So when you say that, did you feel like it kind of took away your outlet of that you got from horses, or did you get it in another way? I mean, I know high school is so different anyways, but I'm just curious what you mean by it, how that changed for you.
Yeah, it was, for me, just less often.
Okay.
And so I still had a horse through high school. His name was Lendl, and he truly was kind of like my BFF. I sang to him, and sometimes I would just brush him for hours. I look back on that time and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was meditating with my horse, that I was really using him as a reset button. And that when kind of life got crazy, boyfriends and friend issues and grades and just the pressure of being a kid, that I could go and be with him and just feel really grounded and have more energy and feel more like myself. And I also remember being with Lendl and feeling just the most like myself.
Wow.
For sure. Yeah.
So do you ride horses at all now?
Almost never. My brother still lives in the Emporia area. He lives in the middle of the Flint Hills, and from their front porch and from their back porch, all you see is rolling hills. You don't see any other homes. And he has a bunch of horses. So generally once a year, they still do what you call gathering cattle, and that have been put out on pasture all summer. And so I generally go down once a year and gather cattle with him.
Wow, that is really neat.
I know, it's kind of old fashioned, like old cowboy way. One day a year. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. So tell us just kind of a little bit about your journey in becoming a mother for the first time. What was it like for you, and what did you learn about yourself, especially like when you first found out you were pregnant? Can you remember like what that was like for you?
Well, I really remember what it was like because I was in college, and I was dating my high school and college boyfriend, and we'd been dating for years, like almost 4 years, when we found out that I was pregnant. And I think I took 6 pregnancy tests.
Oh, wow.
And I remember just feeling really tired, and I didn't really ever feel afraid, just like, no way, not me. And it took me a really long time to tell my parents. I remember finding out that I was pregnant. My Aunt Jana had come over. I lived in a little house in college, and she'd come over to mow my lawn. I guess that's what she was doing. I don't really remember why that happened, but I guess I didn't have a lawnmower. So she'd come over to mow my lawn, and she said to me, "You're pregnant." And it was before I even knew I was pregnant. And I know. And I think I thought maybe I was. And so she took me to buy a pregnancy test, and it was positive. But then that night, my boyfriend and we just like kept going back and buying more, and thinking that maybe we were going to find the one that was going to give us a different answer.
So how old were you then?
And so I was 20 when I got pregnant. And in my family, nobody'd ever been pregnant before marriage. And we had really almost no divorce in my family. And so it was a really, really scary moment for me, letting my family know, assuming they were all going to be really, really disappointed. That here I am, 20 years old, halfway through college, and really with no intention or readiness to be married. And it didn't happen that way. I went with my aunt to tell my mother that I was pregnant. And mostly it was just about time I needed to have my first appointment. And in Emporia, Kansas, there's usually 1 or 2 obstetricians. And one of them was my dad's very best friend.
Oh, wow.
And the other one was old. And not really like the person you would have chosen to be a care provider for you anymore. And so I told my mother, and I was shaking and crying. And she called my dad home from, his memory is from the golf course. My memory is from work. But she calls him to come home. And he said, well, either you got a DUI or you're pregnant. And I said, well, I didn't get a DUI, Daddy. And he said, are you getting married? And I said, no.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, are you keeping this baby? And I said, definitely. Mm-hmm. And he said, you're going to do great.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that is not, that's not the answer you expected, is it? I mean, did you think he'd, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not, and my dad and I have talked about it a lot through the years. Just what that moment was like for me.
Yes.
That it really could have made me feel more alone. It could have made me feel ashamed and embarrassed. And I remember him just kind of holding onto one of my hands and saying, you're going to do great.
Wow.
And then I think he left. I mean, maybe he stayed, but I think he left. And I think my mom was more like, what am I going to tell my friends?
Yes.
Like, this is going to be awful.
Yes.
But within a few days, my mom was grounded and settled and knew that I was going to be okay. She says a lot that Jake is my oldest, that she said Jake might have been an accident, but he was never a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What support. And, you know, you say that your dad wasn't around much, but, you know, in that moment, I mean, that was a pivotal parenting moment for him, like really about stepping into that present moment. And then, as you said, then he left.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then your mom is there, and it makes sense. She has so much more to think about, and, you know, she's been more involved in general. And so it's just an interesting story, but still supportive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, when I knew I was going to keep this baby, I knew I didn't have to. My dad's best friend, John the OB, came over and he called me Ashy because he'd known me my whole life. Mm-hmm. And he just kind of laid it out there, like all of my choices, from abortion to adoption to keeping this baby. And he just said, I'm going to support you in whatever you want to do, and I'm going to help you with whatever it is that you want to do. But he also said, I think you can do this. Wow. And I just felt clear that I can do this. My dad said to me once, you're not moving home. We're not going to be your babysitters. We're going to love this baby, but we're going to be his grandparents. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to do this, don't mess it up. Don't mess your life up. Don't mess this baby's life up. Wow. And I don't know. I felt like I kind of had to put my cowboy boots back on, you know, like pulled my boots on. And I knew I didn't have to do it. I knew that there were a lot of options, and I knew if I was going to do it, I was going to be really committed to this child.
So it shows that you had definitely an inner resilience and strength about you, and also a good support system around you. And how did that manifest into, you know, your first birth and then just raising a child? Tell us a little bit just about that journey once your baby was here, and if you want to share about the birth or anything else, but just, you know, what was that like for you being 21, right?
I was 21 when I had it. I remember Jake's dad's name is Colby. I remember Colby and I taking childbirth classes, and at the time they were Lamaze classes, which, you know, were just really, really different than what I teach, let me tell you. And I remember just thinking, like, okay, what would my baby want? You know, what would my baby want? And so I started eating like really healthy. And at 21, I didn't really need caffeine, but I'd been drinking it. But I cleaned my diet up and started exercising, like kind of serious exercising every day. I wanted to be ready for the endurance of childbirth. And so I don't think I was really thinking about mothering. I was thinking about pregnancy and birth, kind of compartmentalizing my life. And went into labor 11 days past my due date. I had him on 11 days. So I went into labor 10 days past my due date, which happened to be spring break. So all of my friends were out of town because at this point we're juniors in college and everybody's 21. And my dad was out of town, and my obstetrician, John, was also out of town. And so I was stuck with the old man and in a little county hospital. And I went in after being in labor for several hours, and they sent me home and didn't really give, my mom and Colby and I all remember, they just said, like, come back later. You're not really close enough to be here yet. And I felt so depleted because I didn't know when to come back. Like, what are you telling me? And so we went home kind of and spent the night timing contractions all night long, not sleeping, not eating, trying to rest, but not being able to, and went back in about 8 hours later. And I remember not being able to put my shoes on, but it was cold outside, and got there, and I was still like 2 centimeters dilated, but had been contracting all night. So I was really tired, and finally, and they kept me in bed and only had ice chips. And at the time, you got an enema right when you got to the hospital. So there was a lot of getting out of bed for explosive diarrhea, which is just really tricky when you're trying to labor. And so at 4 p.m., and so I'd been in labor, active labor, at about 24 hours at that point. And I know now that, there was all kinds of ways just through movement that I could have made it progress easier, but I was really kind of just in bed, and they didn't want me out. They didn't want me with my feet on the ground for some reason. And my mom and Colby were with me. My mom, not because she had planned on it, but because I wouldn't let her leave. And for sure at 21, I still needed my mommy. Yes. And at 4 p.m., I got an epidural, and quickly I progressed to 10 centimeters and pushed for 2.5 hours without any real guidance. That the obstetrician kept saying to me, sit down on that individual. And I didn't understand what he said. And it was like, I don't get it. And then he would say it again. And my mom and my partner didn't know how to help me any better.
Yes.
And so after 2.5 hours of pushing without permission, he gave me an extended episiotomy, which really just means he cut me all the way through my rectum. So I had one giant hole.
Oh my gosh.
And then the baby was born, and I didn't even know until a couple of days, like I was leaving the hospital, and they tell me about my care for my episiotomy, and that you really need to be taking stool softeners, and you're going to have all this pain. And I was sent home with like a light to like sit with, kind of sit over the top of, and a sitz bath. And I really had what I would call a really, really terrible recovery physically from that, while I'm trying to be up and nurse all night. So I would say birth was, at the time, I didn't know it was traumatic, but I also didn't know at the time that I had choices.
Yes.
And so I just kind of, things just happened to me. And now, I mean, having an episiotomy without permission is really like considered birth rape. But that was just part of my journey, and it for sure is part of what has brought me to do what I do today. Because I just don't want any woman to ever have to experience that kind of a childbirth again. And Jake was a really great nurser. He was not a great sleeper. And so we nursed a lot and fell asleep together in bed. And it was a really different time. There wasn't, just 22 years ago, there wasn't really these strict guidelines on babies should be sleeping on their back in a bed. Babies should be sleeping through the night, blah, blah, blah. I did feel pretty empowered to kind of nurse on demand. And if your baby's sleeping with you and sleeping well, then congratulations. So I really appreciated and loved that. And so I was in college and had kind of different childcare options because I was in college, taking classes. So you're really only needing childcare part-time. And he was really with me otherwise. Sometimes my childcare provider would call and say, she's going to be out of town or she had a sick kid. And I would take my baby to my college classes instead of skipping class. And I look back at that version of myself and think, how embarrassing, how scary that must have been. But I wanted to finish, I was super focused on, I've got to get done with college so I can take care of this kid.
Wow. I think it makes me think you're a badass. Like, that was pretty bold.
It was. I mean,
Yeah.
I really look back and think, oh my gosh, how brave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Really, really. So how does that, how did becoming a mother, I mean, you kind of already hear it in your story, but how did it change you?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think I learned more about myself through the experiment of becoming a first-time mom. I ended up breaking up with Jake's dad when Jake was about 4 or 5 months old. And I always knew he wasn't my life partner. He was a great boyfriend. We had a lot of fun together, but I knew that he was never supposed to be my child's daily presence, and for sure wasn't ever supposed to be my life partner. That just wasn't what either one of us were supposed to be for each other. And that was a hard decision also, that I knew that was my decision, not our decision. But I would also say I really kind of loved being a single mother, that if there was dishes in the sink, they were mine. Mm-hmm. And if the baby got up in the middle of the night, I knew nobody was getting up with him. I knew it was my responsibility. And so I was never disappointed in anybody else because it was just me. Mm-hmm. And so he and I really grew up together. I was 20 when I got pregnant. And so at my 21st birthday, I was still pregnant. I've still to this day never been to a happy hour. Never one time. That I just was a mom. And so my children's needs didn't come before my needs, but they needed me for sure at 5 o'clock more than I needed a beer. So, and that's where I wanted to be. I mean, I think that statement from my dad was like, don't mess this up, girl, was a really just strong statement for me. And so I just was committed. Yes. I was just 100% committed to my baby Jake.
Wow. So you've really used that commitment, as you finished school and doing what you do now. Kind of fast forward a little bit and take us to the moment where you did meet your life partner, and just briefly about your other babies.
Great. Well, I knew my husband and I went to the same high school, but he had lived in a different town. So he was living in Lawrence and then Kansas City, and we were good friends, but he was older than me. And so we didn't really know each other well, but like my friends had dated his friends. And so I would say we're together a lot growing up. But he was always dating somebody else and I was always dating somebody else. And when Jake was about 4 years old, so I graduated college when Jake was 2, and immediately loaded up my car and drove to Kansas City, and didn't have a job, and found an apartment that Jake and I could fit into kind of, and thank God found a job right away. By the way, making $7.50 an hour. And Will is my husband, and he and I just reconnected through, I believe, just a group of friends, high school friends that all moved to Kansas City, and somebody was having kind of a housewarming. And so I went over there with him, and I remember just being so interested in him, and never had felt that interested in him before. And he would say the same thing, that we kind of, nobody else at that event I don't remember anybody else being there. I don't even really remember whose house it was. I just remember being very, very, very drawn to Will Walburn. And he said kind of at the end of the night, I want to call you and I would like to take you and Jake out to breakfast. And I said to him, please don't.
Really?
You know, and like, I think at the time I had a vision of myself. Like, I'm a single mother.
Yes.
I don't need no man, you know? And, and I kind of had said that, like, let me tell you what my Friday nights look like. I'm watching Toy Story, dude, you know, like, and so he didn't call me. And this was in December, and in May we saw each other again. And it was probably a similar group of friends, just, you know, like friends. And I remember what he was wearing that night. So this is like 18 years ago, probably. I remember what he was wearing. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I really want to kiss him. Oh my God. You know, like, I really want to kiss him. And I'd never really felt that way before. And so at the end of the night, he said something like, I'm dying to kiss you. And I'm like, do it, you know, let's do this. And for the first time in my life, and I'd had, you know, several boyfriends, not just Colby, he wasn't my only kiss partner, and feeling like electrified by that kiss and almost feeling nauseated. And I think because we'd been friends, like, I already knew I loved him.
Yes.
So we started dating. He did take Jake and I to breakfast. He was living in Lawrence. I was living in Kansas City. And
how old was Jake at that time?
So he is just a little bit over 4. He's like 4 years and 2 months old.
Okay.
And we just like went to breakfast like as friends. And he said, I want to call you. And so we would talk on the phone a lot and date as much as we could, but it was really hard. I always had full custody of Jake. So he would spend about 24 hours a month with his dad. So like at work, he and I, you know, like Will would drive to Kansas City and we would like sometimes have lunch together. It was crazy. And probably within 6 months, I knew that I was going to spend the rest of my life with him. And for the first time in my life, felt like I want to get married. And so we got married the summer after Jake's kindergarten year. So Jake was 6 years old and about 3 months old. And Jake walked me down the aisle.
Oh, wow.
It's a
That
sweet
is
story.
so cool. What
Yeah.
a great story.
It's a great story. And then Will and I had 9 months after we got married, we got pregnant, had Ben. And then within 4 years of being married, we'd had 3 kids.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in 4 years, he became a parent of 4.
Yeah. Went
Yes.
from a parent of 1, single mother of 1, to a married mother of 4 boys.
Oh, wow. Had you always wanted the kids to be that close?
No. No. I mean, I would say we planned our first baby together, Ben, and I wanted to have a baby pretty quickly, mostly because Jake at that time was 7. And so we got pregnant when Jake almost exactly had turned 7. So he was almost 8 by the time Ben was born. And my plan was to just have those 2 kids. And just got pregnant. When Ben was about 8.5 months old, he was just nursing less and eating more solid foods, which caused me to ovulate, even though I'd never had a period. And so I didn't know I was ovulating. And within about 6 weeks of being pregnant with Cole, I knew that something was different. And so I called my midwife, did a pregnancy check, and was pregnant again. And then when Cole was 3 months old, I was pregnant again.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when did you start taking yoga? Was that with Ben?
It was with Ben, and I had done some yoga with Ben during pregnancy and really just didn't love it, to be honest. There was no prenatal yoga, and so I was doing videos, and they were like VHS 70s videos, like pregnant women in leotards, and I just didn't really love it. and took my first class when Ben was a new baby. And it was a hot yoga class at the yoga gallery. And I didn't know what hot yoga meant. And so I wore normal kind of workout clothes, like a regular tank top and long pants. And my milk came in during class, and I'm sure I was dehydrated. And
yeah.
I remember thinking, like, why does everybody look like they're enjoying this? Because I think I'm going to die. And I really felt like it. I felt really overwhelmed by it. And I don't know what made me go to my second yoga class.
Did you go to hot yoga then or something
No,
different?
I just went to and I don't even remember what yoga class it was. It was just like what worked on my schedule, probably like a Hatha flow class. And Lisa Ewell was my second yoga teacher, and it was a small class. And I remember watching, like I didn't know the words she was using. I didn't know how to do it. It was more of a level 2 class. And so there was a lot of assumed, like, if I say do a chaturanga, you should know how to do it. And so I'm just watching the class. And I told her after class, this is my second yoga class. And she like kind of patted my back like, oh heavens, like you think I didn't know that? But I just kept going. I just kept going and going. And you were one of my very first yoga teachers that you were teaching classes at the yoga gallery, the old yoga gallery. Yeah. And I just kept going because after class, I felt more like myself, and I felt more like I could parent in the way that I wanted to parent. I'd had natural childbirths with my 3 little boys because of my childbirth experience with my oldest. And I'd hired a midwife and, labored and delivered in the positions I wanted to be in, and made noise in childbirth and ate and drank what I wanted to. And so I for sure was moving toward a more authentic way of living and parenting. I'd gone to graduate school, and that when Jake was in kindergarten and first grade, I got a marriage and family therapy master's degree. So that was a lot of personal work, and yoga was even more personal work.
Very cool. So I think we'll talk more about your boys. I know we're going to have a show coming up. We've had some questions in our community about raising children of different personalities, and in particular raising boys. As you all know, we have 7 boys in between us, and but we'll talk about girls too. But I think because I really am curious, I'd love to hear even more about the relationship, about their births and how you've seen that kind of manifest in their personalities. And so why don't we save that for another show?
Great. Yeah.
But tell us just because you learned from your first birth, and then that helped you in your other births. When did you become a doula, and when did you start guiding other women in their experience of birthing?
Well, my first, I would call doula gig, was with my cousin, and I was really the closest person to her that had already had a baby. And she actually lived at the time down the street from me, and she just wanted like somebody that was informed to come and be with her. And she knew Jake's story and didn't want that experience for her either. I didn't know what a doula was. But the second she went into labor, I was with her and stayed with her, and called her husband to come home. He actually met us at the hospital. And I felt like I kind of ran the room. Like my mother and her mother were there, and I was sending them out to get snacks and kind of keep the grandmas busy. And I was giving her husband things to do to help support her physically and emotionally. And I was right by her side. And when she was pushing, I was the eyes she was looking into. And her OB really was great and kind of allowed me to be her primary support person along with her husband. So at the time, I didn't know that that's what a birth doula was. Then, I was really guided to teach prenatal yoga after I'd had my children, that I just kept thinking like, gosh, I just wish there was other pregnant women in class. I just wish that my yoga teacher could give me some things that are just prenatal specific. And I just didn't have that in Kansas City. And so I had really a really great video. And on the back of that video was a website. And so I looked up the Seattle Holistic Center. And 3 months later, they were having a yoga teacher training, prenatal yoga teacher training. And so I signed up for it. And I was the only one that wasn't already a yoga teacher in that training. So I felt kind of inadequate and embarrassed and like, oh, I just, I'm not worthy. And so I was in Seattle for 2 weeks and away from my children. And my youngest was 2 at the time. And it was prenatal yoga and childbirth companion training. And I still didn't really know what that meant at the time until I was done. And left with this doula training, and I was so informed about the way the human body works and births and all the options from home birth to birth center to midwife to OB. And my instructor, her name was Colette Crawford, and she's really amazing. She just kept telling me, like, Ashley, like, you were meant for this work. Like, this is what you were meant to do. And I kind of thought it was silly. Like, I'm a marriage and family therapist, that's my work. I'm just going to teach like one prenatal yoga class a week. And she just said, oh my gosh, Ashley, like this is really, and even like in her notes to me through like our final examination, it just said, tap into your knowing and this work for you will grow. And
powerful.
So I came back to Kansas City. Yeah, it was powerful. And I have all that stuff. I love to reread it. So I came back to Kansas City and started teaching one prenatal yoga class Sundays at 2:30. And for weeks, nobody came, 0. And I was out of town and driving home from out of town to be there in time for this class that no people had even attended yet. And I said, I need there to be 3 people there today, or I'm not doing this anymore. And I had 3 people in my class that day. And then it started growing, I would say, fairly rapidly. That all of a sudden, I was teaching 3 classes a week at this same yoga studio, Darling Yoga. It's the birthplace of my prenatal yoga and doula career. And they were full classes. And we really grew together, that we always started with a support group and who are you and how are you? And then those women just started asking me to be their doulas. And I don't even know if they knew that I'd already done a doula training. But the women would come to me and say things like, so I've been interviewing doulas and I just want you to be there. And I said, well, what were they going to charge you? And they told me. And I was like, all right, I'll do it. And I really had no idea. That my career was going to really grow into a birth worker. And so about that same time, I started teaching natural childbirth classes. And they were really things that were just what I wanted to know, what I felt like partners needed to know. And so it was a really kind of 2-hour crash course. And these are the kind of most important things that partners need to know to be a really great partner in childbirth. And I just believe you just don't get any do-overs. And so if you have choices and if you have a really good support team, you're going to feel like you are empowered to have the birth experience that you were meant to, even if that means that you ended up having interventions. With support, it feels like things didn't just happen to you, like they just happened to me.
Wow, that's powerful too. And there's so much we could talk about. We're going to have to divide this up into several shows. But to this day, how many births have you attended now?
A lot.
Do you have any clue?
I know it's over 400 and around 500 that, and I have a partner that I work with now. And So, I mean, I know well over 400 births.
Well, I love what you shared, especially about how you were guided and how you kind of had those own self-doubts a little bit. And then someone outside, a good mentor was just kind of pointing you in this direction. And I just love that you said that for a while there was nobody. And that didn't stop you, but you set an intention, you were open. And I mean, gosh, think of all the women who would not have gotten to experience your classes and the community that you've built now. But I just love your openness back then to do it anyway, even if it was 0 people for a while, and then eventually 3, and then you saw how that grew. But you had an openness and an inner trusting that you were really putting out there.
Yeah, I remember sitting on my back deck and looking at the back of this DVD, prenatal yoga DVD, and looking, at the website and feeling like I have to do this. And it felt like that. Like I'm going to have to. I think it was going to cost me like $5,000. It was really expensive back then. And this is going to be expensive for my family. It's going to be very difficult for my husband to figure out work and deal with a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 12-year-old for 2 full weeks. But I felt like almost like I was running toward it or being pulled toward it. And I didn't even know at the time. I just couldn't have imagined my career like it is now.
Well, and I like what you said about there's no do-overs. It really kind of exemplifies your personality of perseverance and just kind of going for it and doing things. You don't let things stop you.
I don't.
That's good for the most part, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, so tell us about Home Holistic. How did that come about, and what is it?
Well, Home Holistic is my baby. It is my new-ish business. And probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I was in another yoga teacher training, and we were doing this like 3-day portion of the teacher training that was finding your life purpose. And so it was yoga and journaling, a lot of journaling, and looking at your own shadow, like what are the things that are getting in your way of living your life purpose. And at the end of that, you wrote a purpose statement, kind of a culmination of all of your journaling over these 3 days. And in my purpose statement, it said something like that I am going to create a holistic community for women and their families where they feel empowered to birth and mother from their, most authentic space. And so I think that was kind of the first part of it. And I did that workshop, and I'd been, like my yoga classes had been good, but not super full. And my birth work was probably, I was birthing with like 1 to 2 women a month. And within about 6 weeks of doing that purpose statement, I was birthing with 4 women every single month with no marketing. I've still, to this day, never marketed any doula business, any doula work. And I think I just like manifested and opened up the space for this business to grow. And so it grew really fast. And my yoga teacher asked me to be her doula. And then about the same time, my dear friend and my podcast co-host Shannon asked me to be her doula. So people that had originally been my mentors and my teachers were asking me to be their birth support person. And so within a few years, I kind of knew I probably needed to do something on my own. And that was a really, really hard decision for me. But I knew that my dream was very specific, and I needed to do it on my own for it to be authentic. And that was really scary for me, and scary financially for me, because it was working where I was kind of all over town. But I had a really beautiful, sweet, loving investor who was my brother, who said to me, I would like to help you buy a building and help you start your own business. And I don't even think he really knew that I wanted to. But he and his wife just had the extra income, and they kind of needed to do an investment, and that's what they chose to invest in. And so we bought a building, completely renovated it, and now we have Home Holistic, and it is yoga classes, support groups, education for women and their families, as well as a wellness center. And so in the wellness center, we have counseling, we have massage therapists, and then we have an acupuncturist and also a chiropractor. And everybody that's there works with women and children, and really specializes in pregnancy and postpartum.
And it's an amazing place. I've taken my kids there for kids yoga, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful place, and we will share a link in the show notes about all the places that Ashley brought up, including Home Holistic. And I know there's so many more things I want to dive into, and we'll save them for another show, but I'm real curious to learn. We'll have a show about, I know one of the things we struggle as mothers is balancing our work life, our family life, our personal life, and especially, running your own business. And I'd love to hear more about how you do that all, but we'll save it for another time, as we're running out of time here. And so as we wrap up today, we always like to end the show with a mindful mama moment. And Ashley, do you have any thoughts on that? On what a question we could leave with everyone, something to think about on their own mothering journey, and something to share in our Facebook group?
Yeah. I would say my mindful mama moment of the day is, when do you feel the most like yourself? When was the last time you felt the most like yourself? Where were you? What were you doing? Who was with you? And how can you replicate that more often?
Really great. So we will put that in the show notes also, but hop on our Facebook page if you haven't already joined it. We've got an amazing, thriving community that share daily there, and they're there to support and uplift you. And that's where we'll be sharing our Mindful Mama moments. You can also go to the mindfulmamamovement.com and download your 10 inspiring tips on becoming a mindful mama. You can join our mailing list. Eventually, we'll be having more community opportunities to get together, some retreats. So if you want to be in the know on that, sign up to join our mailing list. And then please take a moment to hop on iTunes, right, Ash? We would like them to give us some reviews.
It is what will help this community grow and allow us to be able to support all of you even better.
So please take the time to do that, because this is a love of ours that we want to share with you, and share your love with us on iTunes. As we wrap up today, the Mindful Mamas here, we believe in this power of community, inspiration, and support. We also know that humor goes a long way. Staying light and embracing the mess and doing things imperfectly are the way to experiencing more peace and presence and joy in our lives. And so now, more than ever before, it's the time to throw out the rules, embrace who you truly are, and let your imperfect, beautiful, mothering light shine bright. So let's be real, let's be here now, let's connect deeply, and let's do it together. So thank you all for your support in the Mindful Mama movement. Thank you, Ashley, for sharing a part of your story with us today. You are an inspiration to, I know, so many people from around the globe, but also for me. So thank you for that.
Thank you for being an amazing, loving interviewer. I appreciate that.
Well, until next time, you all have a great week. Thanks for being you, and keep in touch, and we will see you next time.
We're free, and I believe it's true.